Hello and welcome to the very first episode of It's Not About the Packing Food podcast. My name is Chloe and I'm so excited to be talking to you today about when it is about the food. Now, you're going to hear me talk a lot about why it's not about the food and actually moving into the deeper stuff that we really need to address in order to recover from eating disorders, disordered eating, anxiety, complex PTSD, trauma, all of those things. But I really think it's really important for me to first address why we can't ignore the food when it comes to eating disorder recovery. First of all, I think it's really important for us to understand the impact that food has and restriction has upon so many parts of our physiology. When we restrict, we actually trigger something called the feast-famine mechanism. And basically what happens is when we go through a period of famine, our bodies, from an evolutionary perspective, if we go back to hunter-gatherers, are built to cope with that. They're built to cope with famine via feasting, right? And you'll have seen this if you've ever done diets before, if you've ever gone to like Slimming World or Weight Watchers or done any fad diets like that you'll have seen that you go through a period of famine and afterwards you're really prone to that feast, which also known as that binge mechanism, right? That's actually an evolutionary process, something that we've developed as a human race to keep us alive. When we go into that famine state, actually there's lots of things that happen physiologically, but I think it's really important for us to understand that actually the feast is supposed to happen. If we don't binge after a period of restriction, we likely have anorexia nervosa or atypical anorexia, where we're able to override that binge mechanism. But actually it's really, really important for us to survive. It's meant to exist. So the fact that diets don't work, the fact that 94% of people go on to gain the weight back and more after a diet after 5 years is because diets aren't supposed to work. Physiologically, we're not supposed to be able to support weight loss. We're supposed to then binge after a period of famine, and that's part of our evolution. That's part of what we're designed to do as human beings. As I said, really crucial for our survival. But as I was going to say, when we go into that famine response, lots of things physiologically happen to our bodies. Our body starts to shut down things that aren't required. That's one of the massive things that happens when we're in a period of famine or underfueling, is that the body shuts down stuff in order to be more efficient, in order that it can survive on the lower intake of energy. Some of the things that it shuts down includes digestion. This is why a lot of my clients and a lot of people I've worked with struggle with things like IBS. They have struggle with constipation, like slower digestion, lazy bowel, gastroparesis. They're all an impact of being underfueled. Your body goes, actually, digestion isn't a priority for us right now. Let's shut that down. We experience impaired cognitive function. Now, even if we look at studies on atypical anorexia, which is basically, or most of the time, where people meet the criteria for anorexia nervosa, but essentially are in healthy bodies, whatever that looks like, maybe larger bodies, their brains actually shrink. We actually see brain shrinkage in people that are underfueled, no matter what their weight, no matter where they are on the scale of disordered eating, and impaired cognitive function along with that, the reduced ability to focus and learn and remember stuff, and also with that comes emotional regulation. We see impaired emotional regulation with clients and people generally that are underfueled because of the way the brain is trying to conserve energy. Needing to processing emotion doesn't help us run away from tigers. It doesn't actually help us in the world of survival, knowing that we are evolved from hunter-gatherers. And so the body cuts that out. Again, we don't need digestion if we're running away from a tiger. We don't need emotional regulation also if we're running away from a tiger. We'll experience increased anxiety because when we're in that famine state, our body is in that survival mode, also known as the sympathetic nervous system or the fight, flight, freeze nervous system. I should say fight, flight, freeze, fawn nervous system. And so it's going to be more anxious. We have more adrenaline, more cortisol running around. And obviously this has an impact on our lives. It has an impact also on our eating disorders and our disordered eating, because a huge part of why people struggle with eating disorders is so often about control. And if we're experiencing increased anxiety because we're in that famine state and we're experiencing the increased levels of adrenaline, cortisol, those stress hormones, then we're going to even more want to restrict, to control, to control our weight and control food to give us some sense of control over this anxiety. So whilst I'm going to be talking about all the reasons why eating disorders really aren't about the fucking food, actually we can't ignore the fact that food and nourishing our bodies, sometimes weight restoration and all the things that come with it is so essential, because without that we're not going to be able to think straight, we're not going to be able to emotionally regulate. And again, emotionality is a huge part of recovery. We get to learn to manage our emotions. We can't do that if we're underfueled, like no matter how hard we try, no matter how much therapy we have. And the same with anxiety. There's only so much that therapy can do if you're going to be physiologically just have those stress hormones running through. So we have to eat in recovery. It's not like other addictions where we can abstain, right? We have to eat as part of our recovery. But the reason why I talk so much, and I'm going to be talking about so much about why it's not about the fucking food, is because so often when we go through eating disorder treatment, I was in clinics for a long time, was in CAMHS, had various experiences with traditional treatment approaches that were very food and weight focused. When we do that, so often we miss the root causes, we miss the reasons why people have developed disordered eating, eating disorders, anxiety, etc. in the first place. And if we don't address those, then even if we do fix the food, even if that person is able to have that repaired cognitive function, emotional regulation, has the capacity for it, right? Has the lower stress hormones for the period that they are weight restored, likely they are going to relapse, because actually all of the stuff that the eating disorder is doing for them, the disordered eating is doing for them, is still going to be needed. So I'm going to be talking lots in the next episode about some of the main root causes I see, in order to share with you really how to recover. But what I don't want you to do is use this as an excuse to not eat and not take the opposite action, not challenge the food rules and not eat sufficiently and actually enjoy food, because food gets to be enjoyed. And it's a huge part of recovery for us is to enjoy food, enjoy social events around food. And recovery doesn't exist without that. But we get to do both. We get to do the work around the food, the stuff I've talked about today, but we also get to do the stuff that isn't about the food. And that is the big chunk that's missing in traditional treatment approaches, and why I really want to talk so much about the other stuff. You know that you need to eat, you know likely what you need to eat, you know how to do it, but it's these things that are going to hold you back, the things that aren't about the food that are going to really hold you back from actually making a full lifelong recovery. So I'll be talking more about those in future episodes, and I look forward to speaking to you then.